On tonight's show, we take a look at the 2016 Formula One season so far. We take a look at Red Bull's recent driver swap. And we make some predictions and things to look for in the upcoming Spanish Grand Prix. This is Khosla on F1. Welcome to the first ever episode of Khosla on F1. My name is Rishav Khosla, in case that wasn't obvious. And let me just, before we get into tonight's show, let me just go through what this show really is. Now, I myself have been following F1 pretty religiously since about 2008. Before that, I watched it fairly casually. Obviously, I was much younger back then. To me, reading about F1 and watching the F1 races is what I've done for a while. So I thought, why not share my opinions with you guys, the viewers out there who want to hear people's opinions and see what people think about these topics. Well, that's exactly what we've got here. So we have this, and this will go hand in hand with a blog that I've set up to also run with similar stories to what you have on these shows, along with some extra things if you follow the blog. These shows we probably expect to be about 30-minute shows. Every week is the plan right now. Obviously, school could get in the way, though it is towards the end of the school year, and with summer vacation coming up, hopefully my schedule can free up a bit. So, without further ado, let's get into the show. So, the season so far. Really, it's been, I think the best way to describe it is Nico Rosberg domination. He is currently on 7 in a row, and it's really quite, it's been quite a fantastic start for him. 3 from last year, 4 from this year, so some people have argued that it's only 4, but at the end of the day, it's 7 Grand Prix in a row, 7 Grand Prix victories in a row. And you need to start thinking, is this a new Nico Rosberg we're seeing? What's different from him versus what we saw last year? A Nico Rosberg who seemed very uncomfortable with his surroundings, uncomfortable with being next to the, now 3-time champion Lewis Hamilton. But after Lewis Hamilton won that championship and Nico took those 3 wins, everyone said, oh, well, it's because Lewis has backed off. He won the championship. However, coming into this season, yes, Lewis has had some bad luck, but it's also important to remember that Nico has then still beaten him for 4 races in a row. And, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how lucky you were on track. At the end of the day, it's who has the most points. And right now, Nico Rosberg is leading with a huge amount of points. He has 100 points from the first 4 races, which is, it's technically never been done before, getting 100 points. However, 4 wins in a row has been done by Michael Schumacher and Nigel Mansell, I believe. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Ayrton Senna is also on that list. So, moving on to Hamilton, the other side of that Mercedes pit garage, and by the way, if it wasn't already obvious, Mercedes is still the team to beat. Hamilton he hasn't had some good luck. Australia, he had a difficult start, and he got knocked down to 7th, worked his way back up to 2nd. In Bahrain, he finished 3rd, again being knocked down to about 7th. China, he had an engine failure and actually started from the back of the grid, made his way up to about, don't quote me on this, but I believe about 7th place. I unfortunately don't have that on my notes. I should probably get those next time around. And last time out in Russia, he did finish 2nd place. So, I mean, he hasn't had a terrible start to the season. But comparing him to Nico Rosberg, a person who people have many times said is a Class B driver next to Lewis Hamilton, Nico's really having a great season so far, and Hamilton really needs to start playing catch-up. Nico is in some serious territory here with 7 wins in a row, and if he keeps this up in Spain, as we look forward to the weekend later on, he could really be up there, only behind, I believe, Sebastian Vettel. And speaking of Sebastian Vettel, Ferrari. Ferrari, their big story this year has really been reliability. In the first two races alone, they had engine issues with Raikkonen with turbo issue during the Australian Grand Prix. And before the Grand Prix even started, Sebastian Vettel was taken out. Well, wasn't taken out of the Grand Prix, but his engine exploded. And, the reliability has not been great for Ferrari. At China, we saw the two Ferrari guys even hit each other, crash into each other on track. And in Russia, the situation we're going to talk about is Sebastian Vettel got taken out of the race by Danny Kvyat, who we'll mention later, like I said. But Ferrari has not had the start of the season they wanted, and the people who've been picking up the pieces from where Ferrari has been falling apart has really been Red Bull, believe it or not. And Red Bull have really come out of nowhere with this. If you take a look at their car, their chassis itself, it looks very similar to what they had last year, some minor tweaks here and there. But I think that's something we've seen down the grid, is that everyone's just brought evolutionary upgrades to their cars because you have the huge aero updates coming up next year in 2017, which we will cover in another show, as they have come up. I believe they confirmed the aero regulations just yesterday, so we will discuss that hopefully next week. But right now, Red Bull is really doing well. Daniel Ricciardo has had 3 fourth-place positions in a row, and then unfortunately in Russia, their race kind of got messed up. But and also Danny Kvyat got a podium in China. So looking at those first 4 races, Red Bull is really looking very strong, and it's important to remember as well that Red Bull has an engine upgrade coming. And if their chassis is that strong that they're able to fight up there with the likes of Williams and Ferrari, imagine what happens when that Renault engine comes with a 30 to 40 horsepower boost. We could see Red Bull really challenging Ferrari and Mercedes up there for wins. And I personally would like to see, an 18-year-old take a victory, as we'll get into this, but Max Verstappen now driving here for Red Bull. But we'll get into that a little bit later. Right now, let's talk about Williams. And Williams has been fairly quiet, but they've been doing very well this season. I believe they're the only 2 drivers, bar the Mercedes drivers, to have finished in the points every single race so far. So a very impressive feat for them. And just an interesting little note for them is that in the new DHL Pit Stop Awards, which is to award teams who get the fastest pit stops, they've been leading, and let's not forget, this is a team that accidentally put a different compound of tire on Valtteri Bottas' car at last year's Spa Grand Prix. So they seem to really be getting their stuff together. The car itself may still need some work, as their chassis may not be the best. However, Williams looks to be sort of becoming their own entity, and the past 2 third-place finishes, and this year likely to be 3rd or 4th in the final standings. It can only do good for Williams, who have really been struggling at the back of the order before this turbo era. So good news from the Williams camp, and hopefully it'll continue, because I think Williams is a team that everyone likes to see succeed. They're such a small team, and yet they have so much history behind them. And a team that really has no history at all, coming in brand new this season, is Haas F1, and I really did not think I'd be mentioning them this early in this show. 22 points from 3 races, 3 of the first 4 races, only not scoring in China. But Haas F1 coming in with a completely new car, completely new team, and really showing the establishment how it's done. Obviously, Haas has come in with a new ideology versus what everyone else has done, which is when a new team comes in, the most recent example being the 3 new teams in 2010, they built the car up from the ground. So it was completely their design, and they basically worked on everything, and we saw that turned out to be a monumental failure with Manor. Their only points to date are those 2 points won by Jules Bianchi back in 2014. So Haas has now come in, and in the first 3 of their 4 races, they've taken points, which is a commendable effort. It really is. And some people have tried to write it off, saying that it's all a customer car, but there are still some things that they had to do to qualify as a constructor. They do have the Ferrari engine, which is one of the best out there, bar the Mercedes. And And they have bought sort of cherry-picked parts from all the best manufacturers that they could. I believe Dallara makes the chassis itself and works on aero development with them. So it's a new way. It's a new way to approach building an F1 team, and it is working for Haas F1, who is currently running in 5th in the championship, in the Constructors' Championship, which is huge for a team, a brand new team. Obviously, it's not like they're short of budget or anything, but it is still a big deal. Now, Toro Rosso have actually been quite quiet up until recently. There was a bit of a fight out between Carlos Sainz and Max Verstappen at Australia, where Max Verstappen was behind Carlos Sainz and couldn't get behind, and we saw that 18-year-old inside of him really come to life. But they've had a very quiet season. They've obviously got last year's Ferrari engines, so which some people are saying is which are probably some of the worst engines out there, and yet they're still consistently scoring points, which is a very good effort if you ask me. I mean, for them to be up there and challenging like that is huge. To be driving with that bad of an engine per se, we don't really know how it stacks up against the current engines. But their chassis, we knew last year was very good, and I think it's only gotten better this year. McLaren Honda, a team I am personally very happy to see succeeding and starting to do very well. Last time out in Russia, a double point scoring effort around, a fairly power-hungry circuit. So very good news for McLaren Honda. Obviously, it was a very mixed-up race. However, it still is points, like I said before, and I think it's important for these guys to keep going. That Honda engine is doing very well, and the speed trap, it is showing some very good numbers. I think the only thing they're really lacking is the energy recovery system deployment from their MGU-H, MGU-K, those sort of systems, and I think that's where they're really losing most of their time. So if they can get that together, and I believe there is an upgrade with them running, Fernando Alonso finished 10th in Free Practice 1 and 7th in Free Practice 2. So clearly some results, and hopefully we can see McLaren Honda get into Q3 for the first time since 2014. It's been a while. A team who I think is another popular team. It's a small team, Force India. They have not been having the best of seasons. They pretty much brought their B-Spec car from last year into this year. Very little change, if any at all. It's really been seeing them struggle. I think the car has the pace to do well. I think they're consistently Q2 and Q3, sort of right on that bubble there. But they've had some very bad luck in recent races, in the past 4 races. And I don't think we've gotten a chance to see all of what they can do. So Spain will be very important. They have a huge update package coming in. And hopefully this means that we could see Force India back to where it was last year, where I think many of us were very happy to see them doing so well and really challenging the top end of the midfield, the likes of Williams. And I believe at the end of last year, Force India probably had a better car than Williams. A team that is not new, but returning is Renault, and they're back, and they are very, very yellow. Yes, if you guys have seen, their livery is obviously a very yellow car, obviously compared to a banana. And, they've had a quiet season. I think after last year where there was a lot, I think because Red Bull was the factory team for Renault last year, they were really calling Renault out and saying this engine is not acceptable, which in all fairness, okay, maybe it wasn't. But I think for Red Bull to be doing that, I don't think that was acceptable. And I think, Renault has come into the sport and they've said, we don't expect this engine, we don't expect our car to be competitive until 2 to 3 years from now. So they're setting realistic goals, but they're also doing very well. They got Kevin Magnussen back in, so very good to see him with a drive again, because I think, I wouldn't say it's a mistake McLaren dropped him, because you can't really argue against Jenson Button and Fernando Alonso as a driver lineup. but he sort of got caught in the crossfire there, where you had two world champions coming in, and he really had nowhere to go. So good that he's found a seat this year. And Julian Palmer, who is yet to impress me personally. I think the only reason he's there is he was contracted by Lotus last year. So it'll be interesting to see what Renault does with him. They do have some very nice talent coming up with Esteban Ocon, and he seems to be a very promising driver, even outdoing Julian Palmer in practice at the Russian Grand Prix, I believe it was. So Julian Palmer really has his seat to look out for. But as for Renault, again, they have that engine upgrade coming, and I believe they're doing it at the Spain test here. They're testing it out for the first time. So hopefully good things to see from Renault. Another sort of feel-good story there for those guys, as it's always nice to see teams down low really start to succeed. I think that makes a lot of people happy. Going on to Sauber, a team who at this point last year, I don't think they were this low on the list, but they are this year with no points currently on the cards. Sauber's not having a good year. Pretty much came here with the same car as last year, which is to say not a very good car. Got the engine upgrade from Ferrari, so they do have that straight line speed. However, money is short, and there even if you keep an eye out on when they show pictures of the Sauber garage during pit stops, they don't have chairs in there. The Sauber guys, they're really having to cut costs these Grand Prix weekends just to stay in the sport, and they're sort of racing each weekend like it's their last. Marcus Ericsson has really been outdoing Felipe Nasr, who doesn't seem to be happy with the car. But Sauber, there are some rumors that Ferrari might bail Sauber out and bring in Alfa Romeo, which I think we are sort of expecting after seeing the Alfa Romeo badge appear on the Ferrari cars either last year or 2 years ago. I believe it was last year. I think it would be interesting to see where the Sauber saga goes, but right now they're really struggling for money. Monisha Kaltenborn has missed a couple of Grand Prix because of this. So it'll be interesting to see to follow up on the Sauber story and see where it goes from here. And going on to Manor. They are last, but they are much, much closer to the competition this year. In Free Practice 1, they did actually line up 20th and 21st. However, Free Practice 2, they beat out both a Sauber and a Haas. So, Manor is there in the mix. They're obviously with the sort of back of the midfield teams, but they're no longer a back marker per se, which is, a car that gets lapped 3 to 4 times a race. And I think with the circumstances, I think, both Rio Haryanto and Pascal Wehrlein could bring in points for Manor. I think Pascal Wehrlein is more likely than Rio Haryanto, but we've seen some scenarios where Rio has shown some pace, and I think he's had probably one of the most difficult times getting used to the pace of an F1 car, even if it is a Manor. But they are, they're coming back, and with their new Mercedes engine, and not really having that much aero in the car, they're a rocket ship in the straight line. So come to a track like Monza later in the season, if they keep it up, we could see Manor in a very good position potentially. So that's the season so far, and after this, we will take a look at the Red Bull driver swap. And we are back, and let's get straight into it, really. The Red Bull driver swap. So, for those of you who don't know, though if you're watching this, I would assume you know, Red Bull Racing has swapped drivers Danny Kvyat and Max Verstappen. Danny Kvyat going down to Toro Rosso, and Max Verstappen going up to Red Bull Racing. Now, why would they do this? Well, if you look at it, last year, despite Danny Kvyat getting more points than Ricciardo, it was clear that Daniel Ricciardo had more pace, and I think he just didn't have the luck to back that up. And at the end of the day, it was 3 points that separated them, and they weren't challenging for a championship. So, like Ricardo said, it didn't really matter in that sense. And then coming into this season, he did get a podium in China. But then in Russia, I think something that angered many, many people is that he hit Sebastian Vettel not once but twice on the opening lap. Now, obviously, the Vettel fans went out on a rampage and went out with their pitchforks and asked for Kvyat's head, and it rolled. Denny Kvyat a few days later got the call from Helmut Marko, and he said he was done. He was done with Red Bull. He's going down to Toro Rosso, and that Max Verstappen would take his seat. Now, to me personally, I don't think that was fair of Red Bull. I think if you take a look back at 2012, Romain Grosjean had a similar situation where he was quite accident prone and even ended up getting himself a one-race ban. However, because he stuck with Lotus, and he sort of stuck with that program because Lotus focused on developing him as a driver, I think that really worked out, and now he's driving for Haas and is one of the likely candidates for a Ferrari seat next year, with Kimi Räikkönen likely to retire. So I can sort of see what they did, as Toro Rosso is essentially the same team as Red Bull. But it does seem a bit unfair putting him down in that Toro Rosso seat. Speaking of unfair, Carlos Sainz, who personally I think is a much more well-rounded racer than Max Verstappen, completely got overlooked in this decision. I feel like Red Bull had it pretty much on the cards already. Max Verstappen would get the seat no matter what happened this season. It does upset me a little bit, but I think if we go through the results, you'll see why I think Carlos Sainz might not be as upset as I am. I think Danny Kvyat, it's really a tough call. I think he definitely deserved a penalty in that situation. I think obviously it wasn't a purposeful crash, but accidents happen, and accidents need to be avoided as much as possible. So to teach him a lesson by giving him a harsh penalty, I think would have been the right solution. As for demoting him, I don't know. That's, I used to have really no respect for Helmut Marko, and now it's just gone even lower. I think, for me personally, Helmut Marko chooses a driver, and he makes sure that nothing will stand in that driver's way until he reaches success. We saw that with Sebastian Vettel completely destroying Mark Webber in that 2010 season to give Sebastian Vettel that championship. And now we're sort of seeing that with Kvyat. Hopefully we don't see Daniel Ricciardo become the next Mark Webber. But, Denny Kvyat had to get out of the way for Red Bull's new young talent, their extra young talent, extra fast talent. And if we take a look back at 2010, Sebastian Vettel, in my eyes, made worse mistakes than what Danny Kvyat did. But because he was Marco's golden boy, he could stay in Red Bull. He could stay there. There was no threat, you're getting out of here. We never saw Jaime Alguersuari, 4-time world champion. That just never happened. I think it's harsh by Red Bull to do this to Danny Kvyat, and I hope he can get back at them, and I hope next year we see him in a competitive drive, and he'll be able to look at Red Bull and say, "Ha," because I think the guy. He's fast enough for F1 speed. We've seen that. He's got podiums under his belt. It's like you said, it's finding a team that respects him. And Toro Rosso thankfully does, but there's only so much time he can stay in Toro Rosso before Red Bull kicks him out. And now the other side of that, Max Verstappen, who, he didn't really ask for this, I think. Obviously, every driver wants to drive for a top team. But, he's... it's tough to say what we can expect from him. We've seen him do very well at Toro Rosso. He's very quick. He's very good at overtaking. So it'll be interesting to see how he stands up against a very seasoned driver and a race winner, Daniel Ricciardo. I think it'll be a great comparison to see this weekend. I think Daniel Ricciardo will have the edge on him right now, at least. As it moves forward, though, we'll have to see because Max will get used to the car, get used to the RB12, that more downforce and possibly a better engine. So it is a completely new car to get used to. If Max Verstappen has been fairly close to Daniel Ricciardo, which is a very impressive feat. Don't get me wrong. So I don't see him beating Daniel Ricciardo in these next one or two rounds, but come the next few races, maybe in China, we could see Canada, we could see Max Verstappen overtake Daniel Ricciardo and take a firm footing there. I think Red Bull really want to keep him as a driver, to keep Mercedes and Ferrari off of him. But if you ask me, I don't think Mercedes and Ferrari would ever go for him. Mercedes has a fairly somewhat stable driver lineup in Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton. It's won them two world championships, 3 soon. And Ferrari, they've always held off of investing in young talent. They never, a lot of people were saying Nico Hülkenberg would get a Ferrari drive in 2010 or 2011. And, that just never happened. They said, I believe they went straight out and said, he's too young. We don't want him. He's not experienced enough. So it seems like they'd be going back on themselves for going and taking Max Verstappen, who obviously is a talent, but that you can definitely see he's very rough around the edges. And if I was Ferrari, I would honestly be looking at Carlos Sainz as a possible option there. So I think if I were Ferrari, my 3 options would be Kimi Räikkönen for another year, Carlos Sainz, or Romain Grosjean. For me, I really hope Carlos Sainz gets into a competitive team. I think he's a very good driver, very talented driver, who's sort of been in the shadow of this new, 18-year-old racing driver who's come in and absolutely wowed everyone. But I think he's still very, very competent. He's much more well-rounded as a racing driver. He's done very well in qualifying, and I think last year he really didn't have the luck to back it up the pace he had. And this year we'll have to see. He's now up against a driver who's got an extra season than him, but is a podium winner. So it'll be very interesting to see how Carlos Sainz goes up against Danny Kvyat, and if he can potentially beat him, because Danny Kvyat will obviously be having a different situation to Max, where he's going to a car with probably less downforce and less power. So it'll be interesting to see how this all pans out throughout the season. I think at the end of the day, it's a bit unfair to Danny Kvyat, but I'm also really excited to see what Max Verstappen can do. And I hope Carlos Sainz gets his opportunity to drive for a big team in 2017 or 2018. All right, and welcome back. And, now that it is the weekend of the Spanish Grand Prix, kind of convenient that we did it this week, we will go over the results of Free Practice 1 and 2, because those did happen earlier this morning. Going into Free Practice 1, it was actually the Ferraris who were out on top. Sebastian Vettel leading the way with a 1:23.9. 22 laps under his belt, but it's also important to remember that the Ferraris did run the soft tires, while the Mercedes drivers, who were 5 6/10 off, were on the medium tires the entire time. And we did see, as Free Practice 2 came around, when Mercedes put on those soft compound tires, that they were ahead. Just barely, though. After the 2 Ferrari drivers, with Sebastian Vettel leading, it was Nico Rosberg outdoing Lewis Hamilton, so carrying off where he left off last year. I think Spain, I think it seems to suit him as a driver. Not sure what it is, but I think he does very well when he's given a lot of practice laps. So it'll be interesting to see how he lines up, and if he can go and make that 8. Daniel Ricciardo and Max Verstappen 5 and 6, so Red Bull really cementing themselves as the third best team now. Max Verstappen only was 2/10 off of Daniel Ricciardo, which was, in my eyes, very impressive. To come into a brand new car, to come into a brand new team, albeit, the sister team of the one you were at before, it is very impressive to be right on pace, essentially, to be just behind Daniel Ricciardo. Obviously, 2/10 is about where Kvyat was before, so give it some time, and I think we'll see them really even out, and hopefully we'll have a very good battle here at Red Bull coming up. Number 7 on free practice 1 was Valtteri Bottas. So Williams is starting to get their they're starting to get their act together with these high downforce circuits. Obviously 7th is, I don't think, where they want to be, but I think they'll be fairly pleased to be that high. I think that back straight is the main straight is obviously helping them, but no, I think it's good to see Williams really starting to get their chassis together. In 8th, splitting the two Williams cars, was Carlos Sainz. So, like I said before, I think he's really loving being at home, his home race. So I think he's very happy. 2 seconds off of Sebastian Vettel's time, but that's sort of to be expected with a Toro Rosso. 10th place, very promising, Fernando Alonso for McLaren. Again, home Grand Prix, so I think he had that little extra bit, and he's always really done well here around this track. It'll be interesting to see how McLaren do, and if they can get through to Q3 finally this race. Kevin Magnussen in the Renault, finishing 11th in free practice 1, which is a very impressive feat because that Renault does not have a good chassis. And it does not have a very good engine. So, to really wrestle that car up that high, I think we've sort of been seeing it is the difference between Magnussen and Palmer, it was Ocon in the other Renault, who finished 22nd but never got a time lap in, unfortunately. But Magnussen, I think the difference in mentality we've been seeing is Magnussen knows there's problems with the car, and he knows the team can't really fix them right now. So he's just getting on with the program and doing what he needs to do, while Palmer is sitting there and complaining, I'm not getting enough grip in my car. And at the end of the day, it's because the car doesn't have grip. So, I think Palmer really needs to just buckle down and get used to what he's driving because, this could be the last F1 car he drives. Danny Kvyat, on his first outing for Toro Rosso, was down in 12th, so not really where he wanted to be, about 5/10 off of Carlos Sainz. So, again, I think it's getting used to that lower downforce car, but it'll be very interesting to see, again, how this relationship goes throughout the year with, I believe they're both also the same age, which adds a little dynamic to it. Nico Hülkenberg in 13th and Sergio Perez in 14th. 2 Force Indias, not really where they want to be, I don't think, but this midfield battle is so close that they could be completely in a different area towards the end of qualifying. Sauber's Felipe Nasr outdoing Marcus Ericsson to finish 15th. The 2 Haas cars of Grosjean and Esteban Gutierrez in 17th. 19th was Jenson Button. 20th and 21st, Pascal Wehrlein and Rio Haryanto. And 22nd, like I said before, Esteban Ocon. Going into free practice 2, this should give us a better idea as these guys are sort of doing more simulation runs. Nico Rosberg went to the top of the session with a 1:23.922, which was marginally faster than Sebastian Vettel on those same tires. Obviously, conditions are a little bit different, but this is promising for Ferrari fans to see them so close to the Mercedes boys. And Kimi Räikkönen split the 2 Mercedes drivers to finish 2nd, with Lewis Hamilton in 3rd. Sebastian Vettel had to deal with 4th. And something I think Carlos Sainz will be smiling about is 5th place in his Toro Rosso, ahead of both Daniel Ricciardo and Max Verstappen, with a 1:25.1, only 1.2 seconds off of the Mercedes of Nico Rosberg, which I think is a huge feat. To see these guys all closing up, it was, 2014 when the entire field was a second behind Mercedes. So it's really exciting to start to see this field close up and to hopefully see some really good battles. And like I said, this midfield battle is so close that at any moment it could be anyone's game. Daniel Ricciardo came up right behind him, just a little bit off of Sainz's time, with Fernando Alonso splitting the two Red Bulls to finish second. So again, the McLaren showing some pace, and Max Verstappen again about 2/10 off of Daniel Ricciardo. So I think that's going to be a pattern we see unless he finds some more pace in free practice 3 and qualifying. Sergio Perez and Nico Hulkenberg really picked up the pace, finishing 9th and 10th, and I think they did get their upgrade package in free practice 2. So that might have been it, and it seems to be working. While the Williams guys really fell down the order because of this. Valtteri Bottas in 11th, Felipe Massa in 16th. So, we said before that maybe they were getting their chassis together, but it doesn't look like the best package out there. It does have the Mercedes engine, which has really flattered them, I think. But I don't think that chassis is just as good as some of these other guys out there. Jenson Button bringing his McLaren up to 12th. He seems to be struggling a little bit more around here than Fernando Alonso. I'm not sure if this track has been a difficult one for Jenson over the years, or if it's just struggling with the setup here a little. Romain Grosjean came 13th in his Haas, with Kevin Magnussen in 14th with the Renault. So again, the Renault is starting to show some pace, and even around a twisty circuit like this, you really can see the pace, and I think at Monaco it'll be very interesting to see where they line up, because I think Kevin Magnussen really is a talent. Getting a podium on your debut, finishing second on your debut is no easy feat. I'm going to keep an eye on Kevin Magnussen, as I think he really is a big up-and-coming talent here in Formula 1. Danny Kvyat fell further in his Toro Rosso, 2.4 seconds behind the pace in 15th. So he's not really liking this, and I think, there is a certain point where a Formula 1 driver slows down. Sorry about that. We did have a bit of an issue with the camera, but now we are back, and going to need to get a bigger SD card for that. But going back to what I was saying before, Danny Kvyat doesn't seem to be having a very good time behind the wheel of this Toro Rosso, whether it's a mental thing or it's just getting used to the car physically. Moving on to 17th place, Julian Palmer. Again, not really showing that, to me, I don't think he's Formula 1 material just yet. Pascal Wehrlein and Rio Haryanto, fairly close on track, about 0.3 separating those two. 18th and 19th on the results of Free Practice 2. Felipe Nasr, Esteban Gutierrez, and Marcus Ericsson bringing up the rear of the grid. Now, what could we expect for this Spanish Grand Prix? And I'll make this quick. I do apologize because this has been a bit of a lengthy video. Mercedes, it's going to be Rosberg versus Hamilton again. Will we see Hamilton finally get a clean race this season? And will Rosberg go for 8 in a row? We'll have to see. And it'll be. I can guarantee it'll be a very interesting race we have coming up, at least when it comes to headlines. Ferrari, I think, will be aiming for a double finish, issue-free. I think is what they'll be aiming for. They've really struggled, and they've really struggled to start the season. And I think it'll be very good to see them come back with a strong showing finally here as the European season begins. Red Bull, I think the big thing to look for is Max Verstappen and how he goes up against Daniel Ricciardo. I think if some issues do happen to one of the Ferrari drivers, Lewis Hamilton, or any of the Mercedes drivers, for that saying, I think Red Bull will be right there to pick up the pieces like they were in 2014. And I think, I think that's really where they're going to be. I think we can expect them to be 5th and 6th around there. If they can finish ahead of one of the Ferraris or Mercedes, I think they can call that a successful weekend. Williams, how well will they go on this high downforce circuit? It's really tough to say. It really doesn't favor their car, which is really set up for straight line speed. And like we were looking at in FP2, 11th and 16th is not where you want to be when you just finished 3rd place in the championship. So Williams has their work cut out for them this weekend. Haas F1, can their fairy tale continue? Right now, looking at the results, doesn't seem like it, at least on one lap pace. Race pace, we really don't know where everyone is. And if they do have very good tire wear, or if they're very quick on stints, and we could see Haas back in the mix and potentially fighting for a few points. Toro Rosso, Danny versus Carlos. It's going to be the same story as Red Bull. It's Carlos's home Grand Prix, so I think he has that extra bit propelling him forward, and we saw him do very well here last year with a 5th place in qualifying. I think Daniel's going to have his work cut out for him this weekend, but I would not count him out of scoring some decent points if possible. McLaren Honda, I think for them a reasonable expectation is double points, and especially around a circuit like this, is they're going to be wanting collecting as many points as they can to really bump them up in the Constructors' Championship so that next year they can really bring in a fight to the big teams. I think this Honda engine, once they get it right, I think it's going to be good. I have a lot of faith in them. Hopefully not too much faith, but yeah, I think they can do very well. And I think, Fernando Alonso has said the chassis is very good. And, when he typically says something, I don't think he jokes around. We've seen, back in his Ferrari days, he was perfectly okay with saying that the Ferrari chassis is not very good. Force India, the B-spec of the B-spec. How will that work? 9th and 10th in practice is sort of right where they want it to be. But obviously this is only through practice 2. There's still quite a few sessions left to go in the weekend. 3, if you don't count the sub-sessions of qualifying. Keep an eye out for Force India, because if they have a good chassis, I think they'll do very well here. If not, they still have some engine power to back them up on that main straight. Renault, can they score points again? I think Kevin Magnussen is looking very promising, and if someone ahead of him has a tough race, I guarantee you he'll be there to pick up 10th place points, if not maybe 9th. I think that's as good as the Renault will do, as right now it's not really that top car, but I think they do have some stuff coming in for the Spanish test, whether it's engine or aero or both. I think Renault is looking very promising, but right now I think they'll be lucky to come away with some points. Sauber, can they get some points? Can they even finish away from the back? They've been having a dreadful season, and they can. Hopefully we can see some silver lining in this dark cloud for hanging over Sauber. And Manor, they seem to be a revitalized team this year. They don't still have points on the grid, but there's something about them. They seem to be much more positive, much more upbeat, rather than saying, oh, this is just a test session for us. They're actually racing the rest of the grid, which is a great thing to see. And I don't know if points is on the table. Again, it would require quite a hectic Grand Prix for that to happen. But, Pascal Wehrlein has brought that Manor up very far into the order before. I think he's even led a lap. Don't quote me on that, but he's been in the top 3 before. I think Manor really, this season, they've got to score points. I think they have the package to do so. They have some upgrades this weekend. And if they can start sort of picking their way up, I think if they can get past Sauber and then work their way past maybe Renault or Haas, even with those guys are all fighting for those last points, and I think that's the place to be. Right now, Sauber looks like they're going to be at the back. Well, that's everything, and I really do hope you enjoyed this first edition of Khosla on F1. And hopefully we'll be keeping this up to do this weekly. So next week, hopefully we'll be going over the Spanish Grand Prix results. If not done in a little mini episode on Sunday, we'll have to see how that works. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for giving your time to watch this podcast. And please leave some feedback for me, as I am very new to this. I look forward to doing more of these, and I look forward to writing about this stuff. So thank you all so very much for watching, and I will see you next time on Khosla on F1. Thank you very much.